Hi, everyone. Welcome to Notes on Nonprofits. So glad to have you here. I'm Alyce Lee Stansbury, and I'm your host for today's show. I want to welcome you and thank you for coming. Shout out to our friends at Women Wednesdays that are always a part of our group. So we always say hello to them. So there they are. So thanks. Hello, everybody at Women Wednesdays. Today, I'm very excited about today's show. It's a great topic, which is first-time executive director. Now what? And so today's show is really for people who have taken on a new executive director role or maybe thinking about applying to be an executive director and advancing their career, and also for people serving on boards who have the opportunity and the challenge of hiring and supporting their chief executive and executive director. So I think there are a lot of challenges, which we will talk more about, that are facing incoming leaders in the nonprofit sector. And so we're going to ask my friend and colleague, Rebecca White, who is the principal consultant and founder of the Content Cove, who really specializes in this and is just a wealth of information to join me and have this conversation. So please help me welcome Rebecca.
Hi, Alyce Lee. Thanks so much.
Hey, Rebecca. Hey, it's so good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. I just saw my friend Jackie Malone, a former executive director, just joined us in the chat. So, hey, Jackie, glad to have you with us. And anybody and everybody watching and listening, feel free to add your comments or your questions for me or for Rebecca and put them in the comments. We really love to hear from you and do this live, as well as folks, of course, that will watch it later. But live questions are really fabulous. So first, Rebecca, just tell everybody a little bit about you and your work at the Content Cove.
So thanks again for having me on. Really look forward to chatting with you and everybody. I came into the nonprofit space probably a lot like many people in a little bit of a roundabout way. I started off in advertising, specifically for the movie industry. And then a couple of moves later, back then you could really only do it in LA, maybe a little bit of New York, but mostly LA. And so a couple of moves later, found my place in the nonprofit sector and just fell in love with mission-driven work and the ability to work with people who were tackling hard problems. So I really enjoyed that. And I had a couple of executive director positions, senior roles in advancement, communications. And then in 2018, decided to look for a little more flexibility and launched my own consulting business, the Content Cove, and have iterated a couple different times since then, but I keep coming back to first-time executive directors, leadership transitions, working with the board to help strengthen all of that process.
Yes. And I'll say, just from my experience, that's a process that needs support and needs structure and needs to be done well. Obviously, it's such a critical position for an organization and for a board to hire and support that person, and for then that person to go on and lead the organization. I know when you and I have talked about this before, that there's a lot of data and a lot of research that's behind some of the challenges and opportunities I think we're seeing in this arena. Burnout, I've seen some data that younger leaders, even working in the nonprofit sector, don't want to ascend to the executive director position. So could you just talk a little bit about some of the data that I know that you've looked at to say this issue is really happening? It's really critical, and it's happening sector-wide.
It's really critical. It's happening sector-wide. And actually, it's not only the nonprofit sector. So we're seeing this across many sectors. The secondary issue that we have in the nonprofit sector is sometimes it's harder for us to compete when we tend to have lower wages or less flexibility, things like that, where we see from Bridgespan and Board Source and Leading with Intent, we see the data that's showing that younger generations are not as interested in the roles we built. And frankly, who can blame them? Because we built these roles.
Right. Right.
We built some of these roles that require such ongoing heroics. And I know why we did it, but it's not serving the mission long term, I don't think. And it's making it very difficult for some of the exiting executive directors that I talk to leave. So that's another group I work with, are exiting executive directors, to help them leave well. And sometimes they feel a little bit like they can't leave because no one is interested in their position. I've actually had executive directors tell me that.
Yes, I have too, now that you say that. And they stay in their position probably longer than they want to, and also longer than I think is really in the best interests of the organization.
Sometimes that can happen. Yes. Yes, that definitely can happen. But what I often see is they stay longer and they're the ones that pay the price for it.
Yes.
It's because they are connected to the mission and they're very dedicated. And so guess what gives? Their life, the way they, their health, all of
their sanity.
Yes, all of those things. And so, so one of the things I talk about a lot, I'm sure people are either tired of or happy to have me bang on about creating a work day that you love, because I think you can design a work day you love, even when we are working in a really hard, hard to solve problem areas.
Right. Well, first of all, I just love that. So, I kind of want to lift that up, which is, create a workday that you love. And as we get into this, let's kind of come back to that and talk a little bit more about what that might look like. I mean, I see the same thing you're seeing, and have done some work around kind of the general category is usually succession planning. And I know in my experience, that phrase is something that boards tend to be uncomfortable bringing up, because they feel, first of all, may not know how to do it. And second of all, they think if they bring it up, then their executive director's going to say, okay, well, you don't want me here, so I'm leaving, and kind of leave them holding the bag. I think from the other side, when I've worked with executive directors, they're hesitant to bring it up for fear that their board's going to think, oh, they've got one foot out the door, right? So in the meantime, they're both thinking it, but nobody's saying it. What's been your experience with that?
I see exactly the same thing, and it's so interesting because having a succession plan is long-term sustainability. That is achieving your mission.
Right.
And the data shows that less than 30% of nonprofit organizations of all sizes have a written succession plan.
Right. Right. Yes.
And for all the reasons that you talked about. And also sometimes I think people think it's going to be really hard, onerous, tricky, and where to start. And depending upon the size of the organization, it's probably not as complex as people think it's going to be. Right.
So let's just put it out there. Succession planning is not a dirty word. Succession planning is not a root canal. So if you're watching this and you are serving on a board, or you are a long-standing ED, and you can see the light at the end of the tunnel and feeling like there's going to come a time when it's the right time to leave your organization, the time to talk about it is now. I said to a group recently, Rebecca, maybe because I'm in Florida and I know you're in Texas, but that it actually applies in both states. The time to have your hurricane evacuation plan is before the storm is coming. And to me, it's kind of like the same thing. Like, you put your succession plan in place when everything's fine, when your leader's not leaving, when things are going well, but you want to be planning for. Could you speak a little bit to that?
I 100% agree, because you also can be more systematic. You have room to think through what it can look like, be a little more creative, which you can't do if you're operating under a really strict deadline or in a crisis, under panic. And so it's just a little bit of a different focus. And one of the things I sometimes talk to organization leaders about is, if you already do, hopefully you do, sometimes this doesn't happen either, but if you're already doing annual reviews for your executive leadership, you can embed succession planning right into that process. And that can be the start of your succession planning without having to do a heavy lift. Because a lot of these questions you're asking and developing, they fall right in line with that.
Right. So that's a great takeaway. Like, to start, if you're thinking to yourself, how do we even get started? Start embedding some of these things, succession planning, into the annual review that's already going on. You know, what's the status of the plan? What's happening internally in the organization to educate and groom future leaders who could be potentially qualified candidates for the position when the time comes, right? Things like that. Is that what you're talking about when you say?
Certainly, just so that at least you start thinking about it and talking about it in a different way. And then I think that helps shift the mindset from, we're trying to push the executive director out, to we're deepening the work that we're doing, and we're looking long term at how we can better achieve our mission. So it just starts shifting the conversation.
Right. It's another spoke, if you will, in the wheel of sustainability. I think leadership sustainability. We talk a lot about sustainability around finances and funding, but leadership sustainability is another one of those, spokes in the wheel. Yeah.
Yes, because transitions can be tricky, and we know all the bad things that can happen. You lose mission focus, you lose funding, you lose staff, you lose community partners. So if it's not done well, and if it's often not done well, I think that's why people have such a negative view of succession planning, is because often it's not planned.
Right.
And actually that's how I focus my succession planning when I work with an organization. It's either planned or unplanned. That's it.
Right. It's not that complicated.
And then we do add two toppers, so to speak. Either crisis, we'll have a crisis piece of the plan, or founder. If you're transitioning a leader who's your founder, that has some additional and important components to bring in. So that's it, planned or unplanned.
Right.
And then if it's unplanned and crisis, you add in some different communications and things like that. And then with a founder, that's also important. Yeah. Because a lot of times I see people forget that transition is a human experience. So they're often focused on the mechanics of transition and succession planning, and forget that all the work is done by people. So it's an emotional process. And one of my favorite books to help explain that, and that I use with all my clients, is William Bridges' Managing Transition. Okay. And he talks about the three emotional aspects of transition, which are ending, losing, letting go. That's the beginning. And then there's a neutral point, and then new beginnings. And so and everybody kind of moves through those at a little bit of different paces. A lot of times the board of directors has the information first. So they've already gone through the ending, losing, letting go part. And they're looking at new beginnings before sometimes, community partners, staff members, funders have even got the information.
Yeah, everybody. So with that framework in mind, which I think is great, and we'll drop that resource in the comments, William Bridges, Managing Transitions. Everybody's going to be at different stages in that process, some farther along than others, which I'm sure creates some friction. And I also want to say, I think your framework about, crisis versus kind of planned, and especially if it's a founder, or even if it's the ED's been in the role 10 years. I mean, may not be the founder, but they've been in the role a long time. And how to respond to those things, and what board members need to know. Okay. Yeah. We just got it dropped show producer. Just put it in there.
Okay.
Also put in a resource from Board Source, which I know is one that you recommend for additional resources on
Yes.
boards, responsibilities, and structures and things like that. So you'll see that in the chat. So if you're just joining us, we really want you to chime in on the conversation. My guest today is Rebecca White from the Content Cove, and we're talking about first-time executive directors, some of the challenges, the opportunities, what staff need to know, what board members need to know. If you've been a first-time ED, I know I had some folks commenting as I was promoting today's show saying, yep, been there, ... So we'd love to hear from you. Please say hello or put a comment or a question or something in the comments. So I want to talk a little bit about, and we've touched on this a little bit, but touch on kind of misconceptions and pitfalls around this topic. I mean, is there kind of a widely held belief about this process or about first-time EDs that you just have found not to be true or that you really disagree with?
I think the biggest thing I disagree with is the fact that hiring a first-time executive director is too risky. I vehemently disagree with that.
Okay.
Because if you hire for fit, and if you're very clear on where your organization is now. So one of the first things I do with board of directors when I'm coming in to do succession planning is, you might want to put this in your chat too, is Susan Kenny Stevens' nonprofit life cycles. So we build a really nice picture of the stage of the organization, both across in their mission, and then sometimes, because a lot of times programs can be very mature, but perhaps some of the systems or processes that underpin it are not.
Right. They're not.
And so getting very clear on the current reality of the organization, and then what's their vision for 3 to 5 years out? Not necessarily their 30-year vision. That's very important. But when we're talking about a leadership transition, what's your 3 to 5 year vision? Because that will show you pretty clearly the knowledge, skills, ability, background, experiences that your next leader needs to have.
I couldn't agree more. And I've talked a lot about the nonprofit life cycle on this show.
I love that.
As we've talked about different issues, because it is a different issue if you are a startup organization or you've been serving the community, for 50 years. It really does look different. And we did just get nonprofit life cycles in the comments. So if you're not familiar with that, please check that out. And I really want to lift up what you said, which is kind of the myth buster that hiring a first-time executive director is risky. And as you said that, Rebecca, I literally had a phone call from a client last Friday, driving down the road, driving back, and picked up the phone, and they were calling to tell me, I knew that they were in a search process and that CEO was going to be stepping down. He's the second CEO in the organization's 40-year history. So I think, I can't remember now. I want to say 11 or 12 years. And he was calling to say the board had made a decision and they've hired someone that this will be their first executive director position.
I am so excited to hear that.
Yes. So, I mean, they've been in senior leadership positions in other, fairly large nonprofit organizations, but they've never been the executive director. So, and so it's exciting for that person to have that opportunity, and for the board to say, yes, we're going to invest in this person. They've got the skills and the attributes and whatnot. We're just going to, and there's some overlap going on, as the current CEO winds it up and transitions and all those good things. Do you find, now this is kind of a loaded question, but do you find that when boards are taking this process on, that they don't always know what the job of the executive director actually is? Even if they have the job description, do you find that boards really understand what the job is and therefore what skills and talents they need to be looking for?
Often not. And rightly so, because it's sort of the way it's set up. We ask this group of volunteers to lead the work of the organization, to manage fiduciary responsibility, to govern. And then they're doing this in less than 8 hours a month normally. And then you have your senior leaders who are working in the day-to-day work of the organization, 8 hour plus a day.
Yeah.
So there's a real mismatch in that knowledge. And that's why I like boards of directors to use a framework that's already existing, like the nonprofit life cycles. They can also use, I also like the STARS framework that Michael Watkins, he's on the for-profit side of the house, but it's the same kind of idea. So you don't accidentally hire a turnaround maverick in a mature organization. So somebody who likes to do turnaround, and that's what they're known for, and that's what they do. Right. They're going to come in and they're going to come into a mature organization, maybe do some slashing and burning. Now you've got a big problem.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why, because to your point, they often start with the job description. And I think that's risky. That's the most risky thing. That's probably the riskiest thing to do, is to start with the job description.
Yes. So let's talk about that. So Jackie Malone just put in the comments, great advice. And Jackie is a former executive director and consultant herself. So she's been in this role. So thanks for the feedback, Jackie. We appreciate it. Just lifting up what you just said, that, starting with and that maybe that's a misnomer, right? The first thing to do is starting with the job description is probably not really the best place to start. Something you said earlier that maybe people aren't thinking about is how this relates back to the strategic plan. If this is the trajectory of your organization and your big, hairy, audacious goals, over the next 3 to 5 years, then what are the skills and talents and knowledge and type of leader that organization's going to need in its life cycle, given that this is its strategic plan to move the organization forward? And do you find that connection is strong, or that maybe it gets a little disconnected when they're trying to hire somebody?
It's very easy for it to get disconnected. And you know who's actually very good at helping it stay connected is your current executive director, because they know the day-to-day work. And for example, one of the organizational leaders I'm working with now has told me, so we've done their nonprofit life cycle stage. We do a deep dive into processes, systems. I talk one-on-one with each of the program directors, and then, get inside the day-to-day just to see where they think their strengths are, where they think they have some opportunity. And this executive director specifically said, and we use a job scorecard. I don't know if people are familiar with that. I can drop one of those in the notes afterwards, where we talk about core competencies that are needed now, and then core competencies. For example, this executive director said, what would be a really neat core competency would be someone with a deeper understanding of the changes that are happening around major gifts. I feel, and this is what she said, I feel like there's some changes there. I'm not that adept at it. And I think let's make sure we get that in that job scorecard. Okay, so I wouldn't have come up with that. The board wouldn't have come up with that. Right. The leader who is in the position now has that insight and that visibility in ways that we want to make sure we capture.
Yes. So that's a great takeaway. If someone's watching this that is a seasoned ED, and you're thinking, okay, eventually I'm gonna or just in the middle of your career and thinking, well, one of these days I'm going to move on to the next or step aside, your insights, the current ED's insights into what skill they didn't have, and what they're reading the tea leaves and knowing, what's really happening at the community level and implementing the mission, what would be an added skill or need or talent going forward. So that's a great takeaway.
Yes.
And so I want to talk a little bit about that, because I know you work with boards, but also with those first-time EDs. And what are you seeing are some of those newer skills or talents or aptitudes that first-time EDs are bringing to their work?
I think some of what I'm seeing that first-time executive directors are bringing is a real sense of adaptability, one, continuous learning, two, and then openness to doing some experimenting in ways that don't put people in danger, but that I think are a little different than we've typically done in our sector. We don't often like to experiment because it can go awry. So there are ways to experiment in small ways that don't put people or your mission in danger. And I've seen a couple of first-time executive directors bring some things forward that I never would have imagined. So that's super fun. I love that.
Well, that is. And, I would say, having been working in the nonprofit sector, since 1492, that we don't as a sector tend to embrace experimentation, right? Because we're not funded to do it. There's the funders want a guaranteed outcome. They don't want to fund something that might not work. Donors want to give to the work you're doing day in and day out that they know, like, and trust, and have confidence that the organization is implementing. So experimentation, pilot projects they fall into that. Ooh, that sounds risky, and yet. I love hearing that as you're working with new executive directors, their willingness and ability to try some things. Not that that's going to put the organization in jeopardy, but to try some things and see if something different or a shift or something might work.
Because to your point, this particular person didn't know that, generally speaking, funders are not excited about experiments. It's really hard to find supporters for trying something that hasn't yet been done and shows a proven outcome.
Right. Well, and I think boards in general, I mean, they tend to be, even if they are more, they are less risk averse in their professional work or in their personal life, they tend to come to the board table and become more risk averse because it's contributed dollars. It's the community's organization, and they're there to represent the community. And, I've had board members tell me, I don't want this to blow up on my watch, Alyce Lee. I don't want to be the one responsible for the loss of this service or something catastrophic to happen. So they tend to be very conservative, I think, in their decision making and their willingness to take on very just a little bit, just a wee bit. So one of the things I know you write about extensively on LinkedIn, so I'll just throw out the plug. If you're not following Rebecca White on LinkedIn, you absolutely need to. You've talked a lot about onboarding and about what that process typically looks like, versus what it really should look like. And I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about that, things that you see that are working, the role of the board in that. Could you just talk a little bit about how that onboarding process helps that first-time executive director really really thrive?
So where I see onboarding being really effective is when it's part of a continuous process. So it's built into your succession plan. It's designed in advance, and that there's kind of a year-long runway of expectation of how we're going to support this new executive director. I actually think that applies for seasoned executive directors and first-time executive directors.
Can I just stop you right there and say, no, year-long runway.
Yeah.
Year-long runway. I mean, I just think that in and of itself, I mean, in your world, you're like, of course it's that. But for a lot of organizations that I've seen, that I've worked for, supported, consulted with, the idea that the board would be or that they would have a year-long process of bringing that new executive director kind of up to speed in all areas. I just don't think they're thinking about that. I mean, what I see is, maybe a couple of months, first 2 or 3 board meetings, and then they're throwing them in the deep end of the pool and hoping they can swim or tread water.
Right. And then we get a lot of knock-on problems that we could have just avoided with a bi-weekly 45-minute meeting. When I say support for a year, this doesn't mean that the entire board has to be at the beck and call of the new executive director who's going to be interrupting their day over and over. This is planned, consistent, systematic. I still think that the strongest first relationship any executive director has is with their board chair.
Yes.
And so, so the board chair hopefully had a good onboard. That doesn't always happen. And so there may be some learning that the board chair can do also to be really strong in their role. And then just set up a consistent rhythm and cadence. I think a lot of problems are solved with consistency. Sounds simple, but when you just have a meeting set every other week for half an hour or 45 minutes, and it's just talking about here and giving context. So a lot of times board members don't realize how much knowledge and context they have around an issue or a person or how things run in their city or their town or their community. And that's really valuable information to a new executive director that they don't have to stumble around to figure it out.
Right. I love that. I mean, I could see, and I think a 30, 45 minute, that's short conversation is a way to ask, okay, I can see myself if I was that new ED. Okay, these are the 3 questions I want to ask. And one's about the context. I could also see, and I think I'm thinking about a client project that I did in another city, and there was a lot of history. There was a lot of subtext, a lot of history, a lot of things that that I was trying to get up to speed on that I could definitely see a new executive director. So context, history, and also touch point, like here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm thinking, and then saying to the board chair, does this align with what you've seen? Does this make sense? Am I on the right track, or have I missed something? That would be really, really valuable.
It's really valuable. And because one of the things I talk with new executive directors about is no surprises.
Yeah.
Very few people like surprises. I mean, some surprises are nice, but for the most part, if it's a surprise to your board, it's not a good surprise. And so we try to minimize those. Perhaps you might get a surprise supporter or new partner. Okay, so that's a fun surprise. But waiting too long to bring information or to bring insights or things that you see developing, by having that rhythm, you can just make sure here are the 3 priorities that we said that we were focusing on this year. I am starting to see this other issue across this program. It came up in the mayor's meeting. It came, so all of those insights come together in ways that they won't if you're just running that mad dash,
Right. Yes. I really think that's a great takeaway. And even what you said about, I'm seeing this in the mayor's remarks. I'm seeing this in our program. I'm hearing this from our volunteers. I've observed this. So in other words, when an executive director is locked into their desk all the time and not able to be in the community, be around the people that are engaged in the program, talking with stakeholders, then they could be missing what some of these signs are that something's changing, or that there's new information that will inform how what the ED recommends and what the board decides to do as a result of that. That's really
exactly.
Really good. Let's talk a little bit about the budget side of this, because hiring somebody new, paying probably for a transition, right? You're still paying for your previous ED while the new ED is coming on board, recruiting that person. I mean, what's been your experience? And let me my caveat in asking this is, I've seen some boards who knew they really probably needed to make a change, but they were like, well, we're going to have to pay somebody a lot more than what we're paying our person we've had forever. And we either can't or won't or don't want to do that. So they just kind of left them in the position. And needless to say, it eventually did not end well. So let's talk about the money piece of that, and what boards are thinking, what new leaders are thinking. What are your thoughts around that? I know that's kind of a broad topic, but money is a part of this conversation.
money is a part of this conversation, and it's an important part of this conversation, and it's a solvable part of the conversation. And
Mm,
so if you know that your executive director is currently underpaid,
mm-hmm.
start working on that now. Because if you work on it now incrementally with the
Right,
executive director, then because you won't, I keep hearing people saying that they can't find a replacement. Well,
right.
that's actually not true. They can't find a replacement for the way they've set up the role currently.
Yes. And
And
which includes what they want to pay.
what they want to pay, sometimes the role itself is designed to be everything possible in one role. And that's not one, no one person can do all of those
Right,
things well.
right, right, right.
And they throw everything at they want you to be a financial whiz and the strategy whiz, and know all the movers and shakers of the community, and bring in your own funding,
Yes.
and be the
Mhm.
best leader that ever, so they start stacking all these things in there,
Right.
and instead of focusing on what they need for their particular organization.
Yes. So what I heard you say is that the money part of the hiring succession planning process is a solvable part of the process. So I
Yeah.
definitely want to lift that up, because I think that's, I don't know that that's, I don't know that that's universally known or seen, right? And I
Okay.
loved what you said too, that if you know you're currently underpaying your current director who's been in the position perhaps for a long time, um, and you're able to gradually, incrementally increase that salary, what you're doing is, compensating your current leader, but also positioning your organization for being able to transition to the next leader.
Yes.
So I think that's a key
Yes.
point.
And if you get really wound up, we have a lot more fractional and interim options that we didn't have before. So
Mm,
if a nonprofit organization does end up in a bit of a catastrophe where the board of directors
mhm.
says, "Uh-oh, we've we've lost our executive director. We know we
Right.
can't afford to bring in the new executive director yet because
Mhm.
that would require a 50% pay increase." I mean, I've seen
Right.
some really mismatched setups. There are ways then to bring in interim leadership, fractional leadership,
Right.
distribute the work a little bit differently than maybe you have it set up now,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
that you can work the plan for building the mechanisms. And that's your side of the house,
Right.
Alyce Lee, right?
Right.
So helping generate a revenue strategy, helping, that all takes time. You're
It does.
talking 18 months a lot of times. It's not
Yes.
typically, unless the board has the ability to all of a sudden step in and put some challenge money into it. For the most part,
Right.
I think it's 18 months.
Yes, 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 yes. I agree with that. And you just made me think of something else, going back to the strategic plan. Even if you don't think you're going to, hire a new ED 4 years from now, now's the time to be talking and putting in your strategic plan a decision to build your operating reserves such that you'll have the dollars available to be paying two salaries at one time, to pay for the costs and everything associated. You may hire fractional help, you may hire a search firm. So there's anyway, building in now and starting to save now for those costs that are going to come later. I want to go back to something else that you said, and I've seen this. I've seen this happen so many times, Rebecca, where a seasoned executive director, maybe not the founder, but they've been in the job, 10 years or more. And what I see is that the job they took when they started and the job they have 10 years later typically looks very different, because what happens is they learned how to do all these things that were in the job year one. And over time, they've taken on more and taken on more and taken on more and taken on more, because their ability to do some of those things is just, they got it. Like they've done it 10 years. They know how to do it. They can do it quickly, whether it's budgeting or whether it's grant writing or whether it's the advocacy piece. I mean, things that they've learned on the job to do, and they've accomplished those. And so they end up taking on more and taking on more. Well, now, now you're saying exactly what you just said. Now we're going to hire an ED, particularly a first-time ED, that's got to have all of these things that our current ED didn't have when they took the job.
Great
it just
point.
seems like a big pitfall.
It is a big pitfall. And it's also why it's so important for, and I think you brought this up early in our conversation, for a really deep understanding of all the responsibilities of that executive leadership position. Literally writing it down and understanding what are the core competencies, what happens day to day in this role, what are the must-have characteristics, and then what are the nice to have. So when you're talking about an executive director who has incrementally built these skills, what are the must-have skills that the new executive director has to bring? And then what are the skills they can grow into? So say, for example, you're going to be the new executive director, but you have a strong development director already in place. Okay, so you're going to have some must-haves because you're the kind of the lead fundraiser. So yes, you need to have some must-haves around your role. But if you have a strong development director, now there's someone with the deep knowledge, skills, and abilities that you can learn and grow with.
Right. That's a really good point.
Does that make sense? And so looking at the organization in that way. So who is already strong in the organization that can help your new executive director get up to speed? And where is that not an option? So you need to bring that with you.
Right. I could see the same. I think the fundraising example or analogy in that is spot on. I think, program knowledge, subject matter expertise around the work. If you've got a strong deputy director, a strong program manager that's running the day-to-day programs, then I don't think it's as critical that the executive director has to have those exact same skills. I mean, if they've got a good deputy or a good team in place that's running those programs, then that allows the board to look for an executive director who has great advocacy skills, who has external skills that are going to complement what's happening inside the organization.
Yes. And there are three things that I tell first-time executive directors, especially because seasoned executive directors know this already, to get really good at.
Okay, let's hear it. Three things.
Let's go. One is the revenue side of the house. How does the money come in? Where does it go within the organization? I hear a lot of new executive directors saying, well, I'm not really good at finance. You don't have to be good at finance, but you do have to know the financial standing of your organization. And there are lots of ways to learn. LinkedIn is a perfect example of where you can get really good knowledge, skills, and ability. And if you're really weak on that, if I want to hire a first-time executive director and I'm the chair, that's one thing I would pay for. So I'm going to pay for, I'm bringing in my executive director, but I'm going to, right next to them, you can bring in a financial, like a fractional CFO or some coaching, and you don't have to do it for a long time, but maybe 3 months just to make sure, because if they don't know how the money comes in, where it goes, how it's budgeted, how do we spend our money? Everyone's in trouble.
Yep. I think that's spot on. You got to know the gazintas and the gozoutas. I mean, you got to know that. You got to know the gazintas and the gozoutas. And it reminds me, and I know you got two more, but it reminds me, a good colleague of mine always said, that they understood it, but their spouse happened to be a CPA. And so when there were things coming up, she'd go home and say, okay, help me on, talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old and help me make sure I understand this. And so, that's a takeaway too. If you're the new ED, maybe the organization or the board can provide that expertise, but also for you to find your own mentor, subject matter expert that you can learn from to build up that.
That's a good point. And I know a lot of communities have SCORE that Society of Retired
Mhm.
Executives.
Right.
They do some things in our community here around that. They're retired, and
Right.
so they have that deep knowledge and can help you understand your numbers without you having to be a CPA.
Right.
You know,
Right. Right. Okay. So 3 things. The first one was know the finances, the goes into and the goes out.
Goes into the gap.
What's number 2?
Number 2 is know your roles and responsibilities. Yes, but I want you to know the roles and responsibilities of your board of directors, all of the positions of the board of directors, the chair, the secretary, the treasurer, the governance, how to read a 990, the bylaws. You should know that better than anyone else, because I think that's actually a place that we run into a lot of trouble.
Yes. I got to lift that one up. I mean, I think when executive directors understand and become really the internal subject matter expert in effective governance, in what nonprofit governance really is, because that's what you're really describing.
Yes.
Right. This is a shared governance model. It's different than anything else. And so understanding what that shared governance model is and looks like, and understanding the roles of the committees, the roles of the position, the bylaw, all of that is just huge. You really have to be your own subject matter expert. I think.
Really have to be, because especially, about 30% of your time, especially early on, is building a relationship with your board of directors, understanding the governance piece, getting clear on all the policies, the procedures, the bylaws, right? And that only serves you long term. That's not wasted effort. And you take that wherever you go.
Yes. Yes.
And that's the board source, the website that you dropped in earlier.
Yes. Yes.
That's one of their free ones. I know they do charge for some things, but that just has a really nice explanation of the roles and responsibilities for each of the positions.
Great. Thank you for that resource. Okay, so we've talked about, you got to know the finances.
Yes.
You got to know your role and the role of the board and the committees and the bylaws and just how your organization is governed. Yes. And then what's the third one?
I think the third one is build and design your culture. We'll talk about, I think you come in, everyone talks about your mission. And what ends up happening a lot of times is mission trumps everything else. And so we've had a little bit of a bad habit of expecting people to give up, sacrifice their health, their well-being in service of the mission.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we find ourselves where we are now, where people are saying, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do it. I'm going to go over here and do something else. Yes. And then I'm going to donate my time and my money back to the organization.
Right.
And so if you have a culture, whether you recognize it or not, and so if you're not designing the culture you want, you're going to default into a culture that is not going to serve the people doing the work. So I think you have to have, yes, you are laser focused on your mission, but you have to underpin everything with culture.
Yes. I'm really glad you said that. Wearing my fundraising hat, the sector and myself and we're always talking about building a culture of philanthropy, where everybody feels everybody's an ambassador for the mission. Everybody knows that there's a role for philanthropy in the work that you're doing, and that it's not a necessary evil. Fundraising isn't a necessary evil. It's something we celebrate. And I can see from what you're saying about, creating a culture of fairness and a culture of teamwork and a culture of commitment and all of those things that really reflect the values of the people that work there. And I would certainly see the ED as the chief culture officer.
100%. And it's hard work. Building and keeping a positive culture is hard work. It doesn't happen by accident.
You have to be intentional.
That would be great.
Right. It would be great. So you have to be intentional about that. Well, I think that's a great list. And we just dropped that just drop that into the comments so people can have that as a great and easy takeaway. I want to go back to something that you were saying about spending time with the board. And I'm sure, I mean, let's talk about that, because when you're a new or first time ED, just in the first year, I could see that looking one way. And then as time goes on, what that percentage could look like going forward. Could you give us your thoughts on what percentage of time do you think makes sense or is a good benchmark?
I shock people with my 30% number all the time, because they say, Rebecca, if I'm spending 30% with my board, that only leaves me 70% to do anything else. And I said, aha, yes, but your board is also part of your engine.
Right.
You guys are working together, and a strong board exec partnership will trump you running by yourself that extra 30%. You'll actually get double the effort. You'll double the impact out of that 30%.
So let's lift that one up, right? Investing 30% of your time can generate double the impact, in part because you are empowering the board.
Yes.
In its role.
Yes. And you're helping them see, the people want to know why their effort matters.
Yes.
That's a very human reaction. I want to know, we want to know why what we're doing matters.
Yes.
And so if we only see our board members once a month or every other month, and we're just running through a laundry list of what's happened in the past 30 days or 60 days, no one's connected deeply to the mission, and they're not really seeing how they matter.
No.
And so I think that's a lot of times we get disengaged boards too. So we like to beat up on.
That's a whole nother show. That's a whole nother show. But yes, I completely
we do. We like to beat up on our boards for being disengaged, but they're volunteers and they're giving of their time. So yes, everyone needs to come forward.
It goes back to culture. If you're not, cultivating the interest and engagement of the board and being very intentional about that, and feeling like, well, my job is just to report back to the board every, whatever it is, every 30, 60, 90 days. I mean, that's doing is reinforcing that lack of engagement. That's just making it worse.
Then you're building kind of that habit of disengagement.
Yeah.
Where they're waiting to be told what to do, which is annoying.
Right. Well, and high performing boards is also another workshop, another show.
Yep.
But I mean, high performing boards don't wait for the executive director to inform their work, to tell them what to do. High performing boards know what their job is.
Yes.
Know what their job is and are empowered to do it in partnership with the chief executive, right?
Yeah. Yes, there's 3 documents, and I think I just wrote about it in my Substack, which is the Pocket COO.
Okay.
And there's 3 documents that I think are really helpful for executive directors, but they're board documents, but they're helpful. The executive director might have to do the initial work to get the board chair to champion them. But once they do, they can be really, really powerful because a lot of times your board members want to do a good job, but they don't know how.
They don't know how.
They don't know how.
What are those 3 things? We got about 5 minutes left. So what are
the 3 documents? So the roles and responsibilities, right? Everyone, you can embed just, a quick 5-minute. I do this on any board I'm on. I usually end up on governance because I'm the only person that loves governance. So I love governance. I think it's fantastic. And so we usually, here's a piece of our bylaw, because you read your bylaws when you're brand new, but it gets overtaken. So just roles and responsibilities. And then second one is a board and executive operating agreement, a literal written document where you outline the role of the board, the role of the executive director, the beginning, the end, and the overlap.
Okay.
And then you show, it's just and then it's very clear.
Yes.
And then we know, so then that helps your board see where they best operate and helps them stay out of your day-to-day operations.
Okay. Amen to that. Right.
And then the third thing is a board calendar. So I also use this with all of my clients. So the board of directors looks at their year and literally buckets it out where that makes sense. So for example, maybe January, you're onboarding new board members, and also that's your thankathon. And then in February, maybe you don't have a board meeting. Those are your committee meetings. And then in March, I don't know, maybe you're helping with a spring appeal and something else. June, you're doing the budget. September, you're doing the budget, depending upon your fiscal year. So you literally just put no more than 2 or 3 things in every month. So everyone knows before the year starts,
what are we going to be working on?
Then you don't accidentally forget to give the executive director or their review. And then you don't accidentally forget to do your board self-assessment, because it just is put in where it makes sense.
Right. Okay. I love that. And thank you for sharing those 3 things. Sure. I love the board calendar, and I agree. And having been a board chair myself, I remember making a note. Okay, we need to be looking at the budget in April for us to have discussions about it to approve in June. And we need to be looking at our agreement with X, Y, and Z in February, because, and once you start creating that, it really provides a lot of structure and focus to what the board is doing. And like you said, when the board is focused on the board's work, it's not micromanaging the executive director's work, which I'm sure is another reason those first-time EDs or any ED, run screaming from the building saying, no, I'm not going to do this because I'm being micromanaged.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we are just about out of time, which I knew we would have no trouble talking for an hour about this. And I want to thank Jackie Malone for saying hello. And I know we have some folks that like to watch the show, and they never put themselves in the comments, but they watch every time, and then they tell me afterwards. So shout out to them. As we wrap up, just one piece of advice, either for boards looking to hire a new ED, or maybe to someone thinking about being a first-time ED. What would your kind of piece, one word of wisdom be?
I would say, please do it. We need excited, dedicated people, and don't let being a first-time executive director be that barrier either to aspiring to it, or if you're on the board side, hiring.
Right. That sounds great. Well, and for boards that are holding on and sticking their head in the sand about not hiring anybody, what would you say to them?
There's risks to everything, and hiring a first-time executive director is probably the least risky thing that you could do, because you know what they are. They're known risks, and those are solvable.
Right. There you go. Oh my gosh. It's simple, and yet it's brilliant at the same time. This is a known risk. You know what they know, you know what they don't know. And so you put a plan in place to bring them on, to onboard them, to support them in that role, provide some transition with the outgoing ED, and everybody lives long and prospers.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, and Jackie just made the point, as a former, every ED was once a first-time ED, which is a really great point, Jackie.
That's a great point, Jackie.
That's a great, every ED has been a first-time ED. So I love you for saying that, Jackie. Thank you so much. So I just want to thank you, Rebecca, so much for being here. This is such an important topic, and you're putting out some really great work on this. So I encourage everybody to check the links that we put in the comments, the resources, how to get in touch with Rebecca and some of her good work around this, especially if you are embroiled in this issue or are thinking about applying for that ED job. Wherever you may be in this process, we want you to have information so that you jump in eyes open, and jump in with both feet and eyes open. Our next show will be Tuesday, July 14th, and I can't wait to have another great conversation with folks that are working in the nonprofit sector to really lift it up. So thanks again, Rebecca, for being here, and everybody, we will see you next month. Thanks.
Thank you, Alyce Lee.
You're welcome.